Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Inglis and Darley. My name's Brennan O'Brien, and joining me, as always, is Tim Rowe. Today, $5.6 million for Group 2 winner Chayan sets tongues wagging at the English Chairman sale. We pay tribute to Spirit of Boom. Impressions of the Australian weanling market. Fred Noffke looks for his next She's an Alibi. In wagering, AUSTRAC sets its sights on Tabcorp. Entain also in the regulator's sights. Some positive signs for sports bet, while in racing, a reflection on a big week at Warrnambool, and I look forward to the Goodwood. Tim, you were in Sydney last night, of course, at the Chairman's sale. It's always a really interesting event. Obviously, they make an effort or whatever else, but I'll tell you what, I reckon until 115 lots in or whatever it was that Inglis probably felt things were a little bit flat, but Jesus, this market can catch a lot very quickly, and the betting duel over this 2-year-old filly Chayan was quite spectacular, wasn't it?
She was in the ring for, to be exact, 10 minutes and 36 seconds. Angus Robertson was doing the bidding or taking the bids and conducting the auction, did a very good job. It was theatrical. I think pretty sure Will Bourne for Kieran Maher was in there, sort of, maybe 3.7 around that mark. But then Coolmore and Yulong went head to head, and it hasn't happened that often. Certainly Nimalee at the Chairman's sale, maybe Imperatives, but definitely Nimalee. As you know, I did spot Tom Magner from Coolmore sort of talking to Junjang there, sort of about 15 lots earlier, I'm clearly trying to work out what the game plan was, whether Mr. Zhang was interested, and clearly he was, but Tom sort of played that down and said he was just congratulating them on buying Sedgenho. But anyway, I think there's a bit of ducks and drakes there, and it was good theatre. And as we know, Rob Archibald and Archibald trained that filly, and Rob was former Coolmore racing manager and very close to to Tom, and so I think it's important for them. And Magno was just wrapped that the filly would be staying with Rob and Annabelle for a racing career.
Yeah, I think probably the reaction around from, I don't know about you, Tim, but messages I got this morning and late last night was, how does a filly like that go for $5.6 million? She's a Group 2 winner. She's not a Group 1 winner when she potentially is. I mean, I guess we do have the example of Sunshine in Paris a few years ago, who sort of went through a similar process, albeit on the Gold Coast, and, I think, was she 3.9 or something, what she sold for, around about that, and then ended up being a, multiple Group 1 winner, a serious horse. But obviously, there's some confidence here that this filly can go on, and she was favourite for the Golden Slipper. But that, as a 3-year-old and even as a 4-year-old, there's plenty of upside left in her and plenty of opportunities to win Group 1 races, and frankly, make that value look good value, I suppose, in long term.
You'd think so. That's by I'm Invincible out of that out of Louboutin. Actually, another big winner is Seamus Mills, bought the half sister in Perth by Zoo Stuff. I think it's 525 this year, so that was quite astute from Seamus. But look, it is a lot of money, of course, but there is. Well, I think most form analysts and people would look at her and think there's upside there. She's by I'm Invincible, who, as a rule, get better at 3. Generally like firmer tracks. So, you can pick around the mares, fillies and mares races, or the target Coolmores, the flight, whether would get 1,600 metres of the Princess Series in the flight, I'm not sure, but there's plenty of options there. And look, Yulong bought Streisand, who obviously won the Blue Diamond and sort of solidified a residual value, but for around that mark, sort of north of 5 million, around that same mark. And I could be wrong, but I would argue there's more racing upside to Chayan and Streisand, but time will tell if I'm right or wrong there. But so that's how you could sort of justify it if you're playing in that level of market.
Yeah, interesting one. Of course, the main beneficiary of the whole thing was Eric Coe, Tim, and it was he's obviously the guy that invested in the filly to begin with, and he got a great windfall there, didn't he? I mean, a terrific result. Sometimes it's we hear about the big owners and whatever else. We don't hear a lot about Eric Coe, but an outstanding result for him.
Yeah, Eric's I've sort of, I wouldn't say I know Eric, but I've certainly spoken to him quite a few times over the last few years, and he has sort of been friends with Mr. Zhang and Yulong, sort of helping that Yulong in their ride early days from sort of 2010 right through, and he was a steward in Singapore Turf Club. I think he's run restaurants. He imports and sells feed to the Malaysian racing industry, feed and other hay and all sorts of different supplements and whatever. I think maybe even racing gear. it's probably not a business that Eric's not involved in. He's sort of an entrepreneur, I guess, and Nicky Wong and Henry Field have both sort of convinced him now was the time to sell her, and he's actually sitting sort of pretty much right in front of me watching it all unfold, and just I think he was quite shocked and thought, it's 2 to 3 point something, but when it got 4 and then 5 and back and forth, I think he was in a bit of shock, really.
Yep, and here's Eric Coe's reaction after that extraordinary result.
Other than Chayan, I've got 13 more in Australia.
Yeah. And others elsewhere?
Yeah, I have a few in Ireland.
All right.
Yeah, and then a few in Malaysia and Korea.
Are you from Malaysia?
I'm from Singapore, actually.
Yeah. Okay. And businessman?
Businessman involved in the industry. I import, supply, then all for horses. Yeah, I just a small-time breeder owner at least.
Okay. How old are you, Gana?
49. I just turned 49 yesterday.
All right. Nice birthday present. Not bad for an ex-racing steward, Eric.
Yeah. Formerly racing steward with Singapore Turf Club, yes.
Right. Yeah, you did tell me before the slipper that you were, bought at a race and then breed out to your broodmare band. What changed?
Yeah, so the few phone calls, like I said, that put me in a corner. And then within that 2-3 days, Nicky rang. So I was surprised that Inglis had a management meeting and they felt that if someone could convince me to put her in the chairman sale, she could do very well potentially. And then I was hum and ha. Then no decision made. And then one morning, Henry just rang and we spoke for about, I would say, 20 minutes. And Henry was very confident and very sure of how she could fare. I mentioned, so anyway, that I still think that this is the fairest way without offending anybody, not obligated to sell, but just like within the industry, within friends, it got a bit awkward for me to reject and turn down those offers.
Obviously, you've got an association with Mr. Zhang and Yulong for a long period of time. Did they give you an idea that they'd bid on it like they did?
Mr. Zhang, yes, he made private offers. And so I told Mr. Zhang, I said, look, between friends, and we've been old friends since 2010, 16-year-old friendship. So I said, it's a bit awkward to talk dollars and cents with you. And that's exactly what I told him. Yeah. So I really can't say anymore. Yeah.
So overall, in the chairman's sale, Tim, as I mentioned, it was probably a little bit flat before all that sort of took off late in the very last lot of the night. Yeah, I guess the impressions are there that, across that top end of that mares market, which is what the chairman's sale represents, there's probably fewer players, perhaps, or it's certainly probably fewer players at the very pointy end, and perhaps it was a bit subdued and probably reflect what we saw at Easter in terms of those, those major investors. They're a bit more, I guess, penny wise with how they're working through things.
Yeah, it was interesting. It's hard to, there was, I think, without doing the numbers, I think there was a lot more in-foal mares this year, and for whatever reason, they just don't sell as much as the fresh new commodity off the track or the Cheyennes. They're the ones that sell for big money, and we'll see that at the Gold Coast in a couple of weeks as well. There was just, I don't know whether it's, those, you've got to have the bank, and if you didn't probably get the bigger result at Easter, maybe you're sort of a little bit more circumspect. Some of those breeders are probably in the 500 Widdens or, had a crack again last night, but just whether you're pulling back a couple of bids just because of the confidence and, as I said, just it all has to try and balance the books for those that are running it as a business more so as a lifestyle and I wouldn't say a hobby, but where making money is not quite as important as is for some others. It was an interesting market, and it'll be interesting how that flows through to Magic Millions. I'd say it'll be fairly similar.
And here's what Sebastian Hutch, the English Livestock CEO, had to say about the market on the night.
I suppose my first thought is I feel like we've executed what is and ultimately a primary objective, like a special night again. It had a great feel to us as an occasion with a spectacular ending. I think everybody who came enjoyed themselves. I think the spectacle that the sale represents engages a very broad cross-section of people. As ever at this sale, there can be a challenge, or really at any breeding stock sale, there can be a challenge in marrying together the expectations of buyers and vendors. And, there was a significant disparity in some instances this evening. Ultimately, I'm proud of our team, Bloodstock, and especially marketing, to deliver what I feel is a special occasion to the market, and something that I think anybody who's here or anybody who's observing from afar can see the opportunity in. And a number of people have taken advantage of it. And I think many people here tonight will see the opportunity exist in 2027 and look to take advantage of it there.
Numbers wise, did it meet expectations?
Oh, well, I decided to try and clear a bit better than where we've landed. I mean, we had a catalogue that was made up primarily of pregnant mares, and we took the view that on a good night, we'd clear 70% of pregnant mares. I'm not sure if we've even gotten to that. It's just, if you go back and look statistically at the clearance rate of pregnant mares, it's significantly lower than the clearance rate for race fillies. So as soon as the catalogue had a greater proportion of pregnant mares than race fillies, we knew our clearance rate was going to suffer. But at the same time, we sold pregnant mares well. We sold lots of race fillies very well. I feel like there are plenty of happy vendors. And, I certainly haven't spoken to too many vendors who didn't sell their horses that were especially disappointed. They just took a view that they had a value on their horse the market wasn't prepared to meet, and are happy to take them home and either race them on, breed from them, or take stock out of them. So, yeah.
Do you think the buyers, obviously, the breeders are obviously coming off multiple yearling sale seasons where is tough, or the market's more polarised, if they're this flowing through into the mare market where, you're taking big gambles, or, as you say, the value not matching up, and they're hard to buy as well, these good mares?
I think we probably saw some evidence of what was in play at Easter this evening as well, like just the necessary confidence for people just to step in and go wasn't there. I mean, there are plenty of challenges in the market, but they shouldn't be pertinent factors at a night like this. We talk about the challenges in the lower quartiles of the market. They're not a factor here, right? We're talking about, high-end quality stuff. I think ultimately it comes down to confidence, and people wanting to have people having the confidence to step in and bid the number they need to bid to buy mares. And I think that's an inevitable consequence of the Easter yearling sale playing out the way it played out. If we'd run this sale after the Premier sale in Melbourne, it'd have been outrageous. I've absolutely no doubt about it. But, you can only play the cards you're dealt. And we put the catalogue together in the period between, we started to finalise the catalogue in the period between the end of the Classic sale and the start of Easter yearling sale inspections. Like, we lot it mid-March, the third week in March. So at that time, this looked an appealing catalogue in the context of what was likely to be brought to market this year. And obviously the markets felt that way about plenty of the stock, just not all of it. I'd like it to have been better in parts, but am I satisfied to have gotten to where we've gotten to? Yeah, I am. Am I proud of what the team has done to deliver what is a fairly special event? Yeah, very much so.
But you feel that a bit like Easter, global economic circumstances, war and our lack of confidence?
Yeah, I suppose you have people who, certain vendors come out of the Easter yearling sale maybe not having turned over as much as they might have anticipated, that having a knock-on effect to their approach to the breeding stock sales, certainly broodmare sales. I feel like that's a contributory factor. I mean, I can't cite who brought every mare in the sale as we stand here now, but I do feel like there are plenty of people who I might have expected to be more active in an ordinary year who haven't been as active as what I might have thought.
Do you feel, obviously, Yulong have invested a lot, not just this year, but for a number of years now, that some of those other buyers that generally play in that market, just wanting to use Bruce Neal for press can speak for himself, of course, but using him as an example, he's generally bought a $1 million mare in the past that they're too hard to buy and having to change tack or just pull out of the market altogether.
I think we see plenty of instances and have seen plenty of... There's no buyer in this auditorium that's unbeatable, right? We saw that with the last lot this evening, and we see evidence of that right the way through the year. I don't think so. I think Yulong, like anybody else, put a value on their stock and they bid to that number or bid around that number. I don't think there's too many instances where there's a mare they absolutely have to have. And they've just, in plenty of instances, got a bigger budget than other people.
Yep, so we move on to the Chairman sale, of course, as you mentioned, Tim. We're going to move full north to the Gold Coast after this with the National Sale Series up there, the weanling sale, then the mare sale, then the final yearling sale. We're sort of working towards the tail end of the sale season now. talking of Queensland, story there, big story there during the week with the death of Spirit of Boom, Tim 18, had a bowel issue and unfortunately couldn't be saved. It's a big blow for the McAlpine family who invested a lot and seen a lot of upside of this stallion. I mean, he's one of those once in a lifetime stallions we talk about. He's not quite on the I Am Invincible category with what he did for the Mitchells, but the Spirit of Boom, he's been remarkably successful. His statistics are very strong. Commercially, he's been a powerhouse, and yeah, he'll be a big loss for the Queensland industry as well, won't he?
Yeah, it's really really sad for the McAlpines. They that is a Eureka stud family. I think they bought the grandmother and right through and bred and raised in Temple of Boom. The brother also won a Group 1 and Spirit of Boom, and then syndicated him, got him to stud. And as Tony Gollan told me, he probably didn't fit the profile of a stallion that'll make it, because he raced on, I think it was till he was 7, and he had a lot more starts, and he was you know, not unfashionably bred, but just wasn't by it's by Sequalo, not the sexy Hunter Valley stallion or whatever. But they just came out running, and, Tony Gollan probably would have reached where he was already, but he really was thankful for what Spirit of Boom did to him, as a racehorse, and then, he came out and he had F Troop and Outback Barbie in his first crop, and won the 2 stakes races at Doomben, trained by Tony, and then, he got Jonker later on and was able to win a Group 1 with him, and he's, went to stud in Queensland Aquas Farm and actually relocating to Eureka this year, which was already happening prior to this shock death of Spirit of Boom. He was only 18, so there was, you would have thought there was a few more years left in him, but these things happen. As Scott McAlpine said, that even if they saw it unfold at the time, there would have been nothing they could do, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, it's just
yeah,
one of those things
they were
that
just
happens, and I think
reflecting of that.
I guess what he does is just, probably highlights the fact with Yulon moving to the Hunter Valley about how that concentration of power within New South Wales and where that sits. And Queensland needs to have a good stallion. And, of course, they've got better than Reddy up there. He's done a great job as well out of Lyndhurst, which is awesome. But, there's probably, with Aqua's pretty much winding down what they're doing in that space, there's probably a few sort of questions about sort of where that sits in Queensland. And, Jonker maybe gets his opportunity now with a few of those mares that maybe Spirit of Boom would have got. Tim's quickly back to Sydney for the weanling sale. We sort of, we neglected to mention that, but obviously you're up there for the first couple of days, or the 2 days that sort of went on there around the Inglis sale. Looked like a pretty positive sale overall, plenty of confidence. I guess the weaning sale is a bit more of a speculative market. That confidence we spoke about, which maybe is not quite as strong there at the top end, it still seemed to sort of be a confident enough market, knowing that you're buying horses this year, you're going to be able to sell them for a profit next year. Is that sort of the feeling you got out of it?
Yeah, it was talking to people, they were pleasantly surprised how strong it is. Maybe it is, there are farms out there and investors in the bloodstock industry that, it's their business. They need horses to make it all work and churn and fill up their boxes, or, make ends meet. So they have to reinvest in stock. And that's seemed to what happened on Tuesday and Wednesday, where just there was strong competition. Some people said, geez, my horses were selling for $40,000 more than I thought they would. But just and that, there's a smaller catalogue this year. And yeah, I think vendors also were quite smart. There's a lot of withdrawals, but I think those that they brought horses that vetted well mostly and had good matings, or buy the right stallions, or, commercial stallions. And interestingly, I got told that I think it'll flow through. Maybe some vendors have seen what happened in Sydney, and the Great Southern Sale for Inglis in June was only scheduled to be 1 day, will be expanded to 2, given the number of entries.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing, I think you were telling me that the NZB sale, Tim, the weaning sale, there's big numbers there as well. So it is interesting, this market. I kind of would like to think, oh well, it's going one way or another. That within the broader bloodstock market, within weanlings, yearlings, across the mares, there's holes in the market, but there's also some great strengths in the market as well. And I guess the challenge is for those who are in that space is to try to pick out the best place to play and where things are sitting. But I think that Inglis will be pleased with the fact that, yeah, maybe the Easter sale didn't quite work out as well, quite as they'd hoped. And maybe the chairman's sale, you know, certainly sort of beyond that sort of highlight result was not quite exactly where they wanted to be. But there's still plenty of investment and plenty of people willing to invest in bloodstock at the moment, isn't there?
Well, I think it's the industry. You've got to be, whether no matter what you're doing, you've got to be an eternal optimist. I think go in there positive that you're going to this horse is going to be the one, or your bet or whatever is. That's the great thing about the industry. Everyone is generally positive because that's you're thinking for the best or hoping for the best, and I think that just keeps dragging people back, and people were putting their hand up, very competitively at the sale.
Yeah. Just a final one there, talking about the weanling sale, Tim. You ran into a man who's become quite a well-known figure in Australian racing this autumn, in Fred Noffke, who obviously is the owner of She's an Alibi, one of the most exciting horses in Australia, winner of the Doncaster. Fred's told his story a few times over the last couple of months about sort of where things have come from, but he was back there buying weanlings and looking to add to sort of the quality of horses that he's got, clearly emboldened by the success he's had with a terrific filly who looks to, said got so much upside.
I hadn't actually met Fred before, but tracked him down, and he was looking at a filly that had been passed in, and decided she wasn't for him, but he was quite the character, and he just, again, a person who loves the game. He's been able to surround himself with the right people. Just got his own theories to a degree, and he got, I wouldn't say he did get lucky with She's Alibi. He's just on the ride of his life there, and he's had huge offers to sell her, but he doesn't, good. He doesn't want to give the money to the ATO, the tax man. So he's playing the long game. He's enjoying it, and he bred 4 colts, or he's got 4 colts, weanling colts on the ground. Now he's got 4 weanling fillies, and he's got 4 mares that he's breeding, and really important that those people continue to be attracted to the racing and breeding industry. You'll be racing some in Rockhampton, obviously She's Alibi with Peter Moody at the moment, and all around the country. And I mean, he's loving every minute of it. He only decided to come down at 8:00 on Monday night. I mean, he left at sort of 4:30 in the morning from his farm to get to the airport at Rockhampton.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley. Darley Australia has announced its 2026 stallion roster with 16 stallions to stand across Kelburnside in New South Wales and Northwood Park in Victoria. Collectively, they have amassed 43 Group 1 wins, 81 Group wins, 12 champion titles, and 8 race or track records. 2 darn hot headlines, the star-studded roster, and alongside them is sensational Animo, whose first yearling set the sales rings alight this season. Former champion European sprinter Harry Angel continues to rise up the stallion ranks. Victoria welcomes back with Dubawi's highest-rated son in Gayak. Breeders looking for commercial benefit of first-season stallions welcomed the recent retirement of Tentaris and Observer to Kelburnside and Northwood, respectively. For full details, check out darley.com.au. We move on to wagering now. Tim, usually the middle section's racing, but it was such a big week in wagering news, and I'll get plenty busy this week trying to keep up with what's going on here. Yesterday morning at 9:00, a statement came out from Tabcorp to the Australian Stock Exchange that AUSTRAC were conducting an investigation into compliance standards around anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. Not a notice you want to get if you're a Tabcorp executive, or indeed by the look of things, a Tabcorp shareholder. The impact of this has been significant. There was about $500 to $600 million wiped off Tabcorp share value in the space of about 10 minutes. It dropped about 25%. I had a quick look again this morning. It's off again this morning. This is a big story for a whole host of reasons, Tim, but for me, the biggest one is obviously it's probably the end of the honeymoon for Gil McLaughlin, who's probably enjoyed a good run since probably 2024 when he took over and was able to sort of, I guess, rebuild things and set things up and work things out. And now this, I guess, compliance challenges come forward at him, much of the same way that Entain have gone through things, albeit that Entain are further down the line and have actually had an action taken against them. At the moment, it's an only investigation, so there's no proof or nothing out there that Tabcorp have necessarily done anything wrong, but it's not a good sign. And when AUSTRAC asked to look under the hood and see what's going on, the knock-on impacts will be significant for the racing industry, because if it will basically mean that, like, from a operational point of view, Tabcorp will be pretty much stuck in audit mode for the next couple of years. I think a couple of people's messages I got were going to be a world of pain, and there goes the next 3 years of Gil's life and all this sort of stuff. It's pretty much a long-term investigation that'll sort of, AUSTRAC will make sure they want to see everything that's going on. We probably got a bit of a sniff this idea was coming, Tim, a couple of last week when we reported on Australia Talk last week that Tabcorp had warned off a few punters which they'd found have not sort of met their standards for know your customer and also money laundering compliance, and they weren't happy with that. And that caused its own reaction, but the headaches are quite significant. I think this will have an impact on turnover as well. What impact it has on the national tote rollout, we don't know. I dare say there's a few crisis meetings going on at TAB. I know that I think there was an emergency board meeting held yesterday. There's all sorts of things going on in Tabcorp headquarters. Yeah, if Gill thought the AFL was there's some headaches in the AFL, he's about to find out the beauty of running a publicly listed company with such prominence under such scrutiny. So, look, it's a finance story to a certain extent, Tim, but it's a wagering story at its heart because the future of wagering in Australia and the compliance around this money laundering stuff, it's just going to become more and more of an issue, isn't it?
Definitely, we should have, if we were smarter, Bram, we would have shorted the typical stocks last week. But anyway, that's why we're still doing what we're doing. So anyway, it is a significant story, and as we sort of touched on last week, it will put more pressure on Tabcorp and the online bookmakers to be vigilant with their the complying to the regulations and things like that. On the flip side is ensuring punters are allowed to get genuine punters are allowed to get their money on through EBT or through retail network or online and not using this as an excuse to shut down uneconomical punters. So it's a real fine line and going to be quite difficult for probably, as you say, PRAs and Tabcorp and others to navigate.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a bit of luck. There's a little bit in the wagering industry. Why us? But it's a highly scrutinised industry. Yeah, and I think when cash betting is an interesting aspect. Like when Tab was sort of bigging up its cash betting stats probably 6 months ago, it raised a lot of eyebrows. And and I'm not saying they bought it on themselves necessarily, but AUSTRAC look for opportunities. They've had a stated aim to crack down on cash betting. They see it as a massive compliance risk and a massive issue around money laundering and all those things. We don't know if any of that's gone on at Tabcorp. We're about to find out. We'll find out a fair bit about Entain case this year, but the Entain, I think the Entain charges were bought 2020. Well, the Entain, investigation began in 2023. The charges were born in late 2024. They're not getting to court till late 2026, Tim. So this is a long-term process. Speaking of Entain, they had their own little, regulatory hiccup this week. ACMA having basically getting them to make a court enforceable undertaking that they'll review their own processes around the way that use BetStop. I think the 500 breaches of people who were currently self-excluded or through BetStop, but across the Ladbrokes and Ned's brand. So a few concerns there. I did chat to another bookie, not related to Entain the other day, but he said some of the challenges that they have around people using variations of their name and blocking things and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of compliance stuff, which I guess from a corporate level, you should be across, I suppose. That's probably the question, but certainly those smaller bookies struggle sometimes to know whether, the different film forms of names are working out. Some positive news for Sportsbet this week. I think 12% revenue bump for year on year. Now, a lot of that had to do with some favourable currency conversion because obviously they report, because they're flooders then in a global company, they report in US dollars, and just the currency fluctuations sort of played in their favours. But the sign is basically it's a net positive for them. They reported that sports continues to grow, racing continues to be a challenge, and there's some strong softness in the greyhound area, which is interesting given our conversation about Tab before. But yeah, I think Sportsbet, after I guess a year last year, well, I think they lost 6% of revenue year on year, seemed to be 2 quarters of positive growth and sort of into a position where they're the dominant player in the Australian market. They seem to be in a relatively good position. They're probably glad they're not in Entain or Tab's position where they're having to show their books to AUSTRAC, which will be another aspect as well. And just a final one on wagering, an article I urge you to check out from Warwick Barr this week. He's done a great job of a story about computer-assisted wagering, and it's an American sort of phenomenon, I suppose, of people, I guess, the big punters, because pretty much all of betting on American racing comes through parimutuel, betting late through computer-assisted programs. And there was a horse that won a Group 1 race, a Japanese horse won a Group 1 race on the weekend that literally when they went to the gates was $12 on what we call the tote, and then started $5, and that caused a huge stir and a fair few issues associated with that. I think there are applications within Australia. I know there's access to APIs within Australia that some get and others don't get in terms of totalisator betting and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it does, the lack of price certainty. We've spoken about the issue around that with Whirlpool. We've also talking about the issue around I guess the perception of parimutuel betting, the national tote coming in. There's probably a few things to think about around that, Tim. So, we're sort of work around that. Finally, in racing, Tim, and it's been a bit of a me show for the last 5 minutes or so, but I reflect on the fact I've been to the Warrnambool Carnival the last 3 days. So I'll get there one year, Tim. I promise. One day, 1 year, out of some miracle, it won't be World Cup, and it won't be chairman sale / weanling sale. We'll have a word to our good friends at Inglis and try to get them to shift it around to give you an opportunity to get down to Warrnambool. You know, we're getting into the demographic, Tim, you and I, where we'd be well suited down there, put it that way, because there's a lot of older men who are fond of a bet and fond of having a couple of beers, and it's quite a phenomenon, really. Huge week, big stories, like great stories around about, obviously, Braden Small winning the Grand Annual. 3 years ago, he was diagnosed with a brain tumour. We obviously know his dad was Cyril Small that rode Vo Rogue. Awesome story, like, just a, and it's, we're not a 12-year-old called Instigator who was having his last start in a race. Look, I'm not going to say it was the most high quality Grand Annual I've ever seen, but the finish was absolutely spot on. We could have, anyway. I've got my own little pet peeve about the way it was narrated / commentated, but I'll leave that to other people around it. But I do feel like we don't need the clown show. Let's just call the race, but it does work well. Interesting one, Tim. I was talking to one of the guys from the racing club there who told me they had $80,000 in FPOS withdrawn on the first day alone at Warrnambool added cash. Now, that's kind of interesting. That was more than they had across the first 3 days. Oh, sorry, the whole 3 days last year. So, are people going back to cash, do you think, Tim? What do you think about that? Is the everyday punter happy to have their bets in cash and buy their beers in cash rather than sort of rely on the card or the apps to get them through? What's your sort of perception around that stuff?
I think particularly Warrnambool and Wagga, they're punting carnivals. They're not, yes, there's social elements, but first and foremost, they attract punters, people that love the punt. And there's nothing like, even now, I still think the betting ring, there's something about the betting ring at, and I haven't been to Warrnambool, and judging, people will be thankful we're no longer video recording this because you haven't left your bed this whole time since.
Been a big week, Tim.
Obviously, it's taken it out of you, but that's okay. I think there's something about, the cash and the punter v bookie, relationship face to face. There's something about it, you can't beat it.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, I think that sort of getting back to it, there is a bit of how good is the bull and all this sort of stuff. I'm not sure it needs the spruikers, Tim. Like, I'm really honest. Like, I've been obviously going there for a long year. I grew up down there a long time. I think I worked out the other day, the first Warrnambool Carnival I went to was 1988. So I'm coming up on 40 years since my first carnival. Maybe I'm becoming an old man and I don't need it. It was good to actually met Blogsy. It was nice to meet him. He seems like a nice guy. And they had him down there sort of talking up that. I'm not too sure if you're just speaking to the converted already or not, but that's a strategy that other people need to execute, and good luck to them. The screaming out and carrying on about how bloody good is the bull, all that sort of stuff, not my cup of tea. Maybe there's an audience for that. There probably is, but I think, the Grand Annual is an awesome race. It's the longest race in Australia. It's got the most jumps of any race in the world. It stands the test of time. Let the race be called and let it be done. And that's probably my 2 cents around that. But I think that there's, and I was talking to the club there. I think they had 8,000 there on the Tuesday, probably similar numbers on the Wednesday, maybe a few more on the Thursday. The weather wasn't kind, but it really is down there. I went to the Dogs on Wednesday night for my sins, Tim, and we got hailed on. Message out to our good friend Andrew Birch from New Zealand Thoroughbred Marketing for bringing some of his hardy Kiwi friends out there. I thought the Kiwis were tough. I thought they could handle any weather, but the moaning that was coming out of our friends from across the Tasman when the hail started coming down when we were waiting for a bus to get back to the Dogs on Wednesday, I was a bit disappointed actually, but Birchie wasn't moaning, to be fair. Most of them were moaning at Birchie because he was the one that decided to take them out there. But they did a good job. And you talk about branding. God, there's sports bet branding everywhere out there. I've never seen so much sports bet branding. I walked over to about 6 sports bet beaties, which could come in use during the Tasmanian winter. Tab obviously branding everywhere around Warrnambool, the race course, which was interesting because I did note last year, and a few other people noted that the rebrand of the Warrnambool Racing Club last year had a very similar colour palette to another corporate bookmaker that wasn't the sponsor. I did notice that the blue this year was a lot darker. So it was definitely they had moved it along. So yeah, perhaps there was a note there made had to go. But the tab branding was everywhere. They had huge tub painting up on the hill there where people watch the Grand Annual. Again, maybe I'm a party pooper, but I'm not too sure when the horses are about 1.5 kilometres away from the benefit of being up a hill to watch them. You can see them pretty good from where I was standing. But anyway, that's fine. Other people have their traditions. But interesting week. Good to catch up with a lot of people. People really enjoy the week. Obviously, at the moment too, Tim, we've got the Adelaide Carnival ongoing and the Goodwood this week. We'll round off that. From what I'm hearing, turnover has been very, very positive over there. There's some very good vibes around that. Yeah, I mean, what have you made of the Adelaide Carnival so far, Tim? And obviously, it's it sort of it has its place, and it sort of fills that gap between Sydney and Brisbane. And look, it seems to me to be a pretty successful few weeks.
Oh, Adelaide's a great city. For anyone that goes to the Adelaide Yearling Sale Magic Millions, that's always great fun. And so there's something about Adelaide. I've had the stakes runners there actually, and in the past, and gone over and had great days. Yeah, I think it's a good carnival. The horses find their right mark there. You can place them well, avoid the very, very best. And and there's more stakes, right? Obviously the Goodwood, and there's the Phillies Classic on Saturday. I think there's something for everyone. Whether some of those races should be downgraded, well, that's up for the patent committee and things like that, Asian patent committee to decide. But it's still, I think it's a good carnival.
Yeah, and I think they'd be pretty happy with how things went on. I'd urge you to have a read of Warwick Barr's story about Trent Edmonds has got a runner in the race tomorrow. Worthwhile having a read of that. It's a good story about sort of Trent sort of rebuilt his sort of stable, having worked his way out from working with his dad in Queensland, and now sort of operating on his own, and gets his chance at a Group 1. There's probably a few other horses over there that get their chance at a Group 1. There is good value in that race. Okay, thanks for joining on Straight Talk, brought to you by our good friends at Darley and Inglis. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to us. Send us an email at editor@straight.com.au and let us know if there's anything you want us to talk about. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.